right. All right. Well, hello. Thank you all so much for coming today to watch another episode in SEDA College Online's Intermediate Language series. I'm very happy you could join me today, and I'm looking forward to talking about a very good lesson today. So, I hope you're ready and prepared because we're going to start diving into some new material. I know that the past few lessons of mine have been a little bit of review, and then we talked about some writing techniques. So we're continuing with that idea, and now we are moving into another very important part of English speaking and writing. Um, so we're going to try to go through this in detail, answer all your questions. And then, as always, for our SEDA students, if you are currently a SEDA student, remember that for all of these lessons, you can find additional material in the SEDA Google Classroom. So please go check that out and find some additional work material that is always connected to my previous and current lessons. All right, so let's begin. What is that incredible thing we're talking about? Well, it's a wonderful mix of both grammar and vocabulary. Yeah, it all comes together here. And these are phrasal verbs. Sorry, phrasal verbs. These are phrasal verbs. I know so many of you. Oh gosh, phrasal verbs. Oh, I know. They are not the friendliest and they are very frustrating. Um, and they are all over English. English speakers use them almost every sentence. So unfortunately, it's just one of those things that you've really got to pay attention to if you want to master the language, is you have to tackle phrasal verbs. So we're going to talk about them phrasal verbs. I'm going to try to give you some information about how to use them correctly. And then at the end, we'll just talk about 15 common verbs that I think are important for you to know. Okay, so I'm going to begin with what are they? What are phrasal verbs? Well, really, a phrasal verb belongs to a bigger category. This category is called compound words. And there are many different types of compound words. So this is something that is a property of English as a language. So in English, you can put words together very easily. Um, really, all languages that come from German can do this. So a bit of linguistic history. English is a language that is connected to German. And German is kind of the original, not modern German, but an older version of German is the original language that created English and several other languages across Europe. Well, this whole language family, that's what we call them, a language family, has a property that allows it to put words together very easily. You can change from noun to verb, verb to adjective, adjective to adverb very easily. And you can put two together no problem. And you can put nouns and verbs together, adjectives and nouns together. You can put adverbs and adjectives together very easily. Other languages do not like this. There are lots of rules about how and when you can put words together. English doesn't have these rules. And so it can be a little tricky, and phrasal verbs are one of these types of things. So what do I mean by that? Well, as I said, you can make combinations of other words. So things like toothpaste, or haircut, or blackbird. All of these three words are combinations of other things. So toothpaste is the noun tooth and the noun paste put together to make paste for your teeth, toothpaste. Or I say, I want a haircut as a noun. Well, originally I had my hair and I have the verb cut. Put them together, I get a haircut. Or blackbird. This is something that you can even have different. I can have a blackbird, which is a specific type of bird, or I can even separate them and have a black bird and have a different thing. Yeah, there's all kinds of ways that you can combine words in English. These are called compound nouns. We'll talk about compound nouns in the future, but this is another type of thing that you can do with combinations. Well, just like we have these compound nouns, phrasal verbs are really called compound verbs. So they are verbs put together with other words to make a new one. That's all they are. So examples like to turn down. These are all infinitive. So I'm showing these in the infinitive form. The phrasal verb is just turn down, or run into, or hang out. All three of these are compound verbs. They're the verb turn, run, and hang with some additional part, usually a preposition. If we want to get very specific, there's different types of things that can come here. Some are prepositions, some are called particles, and that's a lot of grammar information. I'm not going to talk about that. If you want to do some research, feel free to search on the internet phrasal verbs, and there's lots of information talking about the very specific grammar information about this, but I'm not going to go into that for this lesson. So this is kind of what they are, but what are the properties of phrasal verbs? So I'll talk about their characteristics. So first, they are one unit. So phrasal verbs, even though they are made from more than one word, they are really one whole unit in the sentence, one complete part, one thing. We do not think about them as two words or two different things. When an English speaker hears a phrasal verb, we think of it as one thing, even though we write it differently, and sometimes, as we'll see, we might even separate them to a different part of the sentence. No matter what, they're always one. So something like, please turn down the radio. We can see here that turn down is one unit. It's please turn down the radio. And we think about it in those parts. Or I can separate it. Please turn the radio down. And I still, in my mind, an English speaker still connects turn and down. I know that they are one thing. Additionally, the meaning of a phrasal verb usually has no connection to the words at all. Sometimes they do. Sometimes there is some connection to the words, but usually none at all. And there is no help. I'm sorry. No rules, no nothing. Just memorization. Something like to hang out. We use it to mean gather socially and go to a party or go to a pub or talk with friends. That's hanging out. Um, but it has nothing to do with verb hang or preposition out. Nothing. But when you combine them together, new unit, new verb, gather socially. Or, for example, to run into. This one's a mix of both. This one is very metaphorical. So sometimes phrasal verbs are metaphorical. So this verb means to see someone unexpectedly. That's to run into, to meet someone on the street or in the grocery store or in a cafe or a bar, and someone that you did not expect to meet. Well, this idea is very physical, to run into. That's to run into. Um, well, we take that idea and use it as a metaphor, meaning to run into another person. Additionally, phrasal verbs can have up to 3 parts. So they can have 2 or 3 words that combine to make them. The majority have 2 words, but there is a list of few that have 3, and we'll also talk about those. For example, to look forward to. So here, the verb look forward to, all of those 3 words are one unit, one idea. And additionally, here is where the grammar comes together. So all of these are the general characteristics of a phrasal verb. But now this property is where grammar becomes involved. Phrasal verbs with objects can be separated, just like this, and others cannot, like this. And so that's what we're going to focus on today, is what are the types of phrasal verbs in terms of their ability to separate and to not separate, and when they can separate it, what are the rules? So let's begin with the inseparable phrasal verbs, the ones that must stay together. Well, some are intransitive. And this is a very important idea, the idea of transitivity. So if something is intransitive, it means it does not have an object. So if you remember from my previous lessons, I talked a bit about subjects and objects. They're all connected to the verb. So a verb that has an object has a thing connected to it. So something like verb to hit. So I hit the ball. Well, there the ball is the object because it received, it received the action. However, some verbs don't have an object, and those that don't have an object do not have a thing. There's nothing to receive. So phrasal verbs are the same. Some are intransitive. This means they don't have an object, and this means that they cannot be separated. So it's always the object that separates a phrasal verb and only the object. And so here are some examples. To wake up, to go back, to come over. All of these phrasal verbs are intransitive. They don't have an object, and they will always, always come together. So, for example, I wake up at 8 a.m. every day. So there's no object here. We have a prepositional phrase after at 8 a.m., and I can say, I wake up. Complete sentence. So intransitive. She hopes to go back to her country for Christmas. So here we have an infinitive phrase, to go back, and that's all we need. I said I can say she hopes to go back. Complete. So then it's intransitive, must happen together. Or they're coming over for dinner tonight. I can also say they're coming over tonight, or they're coming over, because the verb to come over is intransitive, no object, so it always happens together. These are kind of the simplest phrasal verbs. You just use them as they are. But how about the opposite? Well, the transitive phrasal verbs are where we have things a little more tricky. Some verbs are transitive. Sorry, this should say separable. Some verbs are transitive. This means they can have an object. They cannot be separated. Oh, yeah, so they cannot be separated. So some are inseparable and transitive. The preposition is connected to the following word. So this is kind of the idea as to why they are not separable. So the previous ones were intransitive, no object. These are transitive. They can have an object, or they must have an object, but they still cannot be separated. And this is due to a connection between the following preposition and the rest of the sentence. So something like to look after, to run into, to put up with. So these three phrasal verbs are transitive. They must have an object. You look after someone. You run into someone. You put up with something. They must have a thing here. However, the phrasal verb cannot be separated. They must stay together. And this is because the preposition here really connects with this word after somebody, into somebody, with something. Really, they make a strong connection, so we can't separate them. I take after my mother. We look exactly alike. So take after here means to look like. So I take after my mother. I cannot say I take my mother after. We can't do that. It must be take after or look after. They're very similar. How about my father ran into a friend at the grocery store? So here, this is, to see unexpectedly. My father ran into a friend. This is really one phrase. Or Sarah has to put up with our cousins at the family reunion. So in all three of these examples, the phrasal verbs must stay together, but they still have an object, like my mother, a friend, our cousins. They still have this object. However, some phrasal verbs are separable. And when they're separable, this is when things get a little tricky. They're still transitive. They can have an object, or they must have an object, and they can be separated by that object, but only if it's an object pronoun. That's an important distinction. So we're talking about me, you, him, her, it, us, and them. Those are the object pronouns, and these are the only things that can separate, or these are very important to identify when you look at a phrasal verb. So, for example, to hand in, to bring up, to think over. So all three of these phrasal verbs are very important. So to hand in is to turn in an assignment. To bring up is to say an idea. To think over is to kind of consider a topic. And all three of these can be separated. So he handed in the essay. So here, I don't separate it. Many times it's an option. I'll talk about how to know when it's an option and when it's an obligation in a moment. But for now, we can see that it works this way. You can have it together, and you can say he handed in the essay. Or I can say, I brought the idea up during the meeting for discussion. So now I've separated the phrasal verb. I have the phrasal verb bring up in the past tense, brought up, and I have the object idea in the center. So we can separate with the object or an object pronoun. Or how about this, for example? You should think about buying a house over before doing it. Or you should think over buying a house before doing it. Sorry, I can read. I need to read my own slide. You should think buying a house over before doing it. Think about is another common phrasal verb. So here we've separated with a gerund phrase, buying a house. So a whole noun phrase can separate a phrasal verb. That's okay. And think over is still one idea, one unit. And I can undo it. I can say you should think over buying a house before doing it. That's okay too. No difference really between the two. So if you separate it or not, usually will not change anything. And what we can see here is that different kinds of nouns can separate it. They can be nouns, the whole phrase, like just a thing, the idea. They can be a whole gerund phrase, like buying a house, or they can be an object pronoun, like it, or you, or them. So, what are the rules here? Well, there's really two rules for separable phrasal verbs. So remember, for the intransitive and transitive inseparable verbs, you just use them together, no rules. But when you can separate it, here are the rules. When the direct object is a specific thing, the position doesn't matter. So in my previous examples, like hand in the essay, because the direct object is the specific thing, the essay, it doesn't matter. You can say hand in the essay or hand the essay in, no difference. However, when the direct object is a pronoun, it must separate the phrasal verb. This is the most important rule because this is always true and it cannot be the other way. So if you're using a pronoun like him, her, it, them, us, the, the pronoun must go and separate the phrasal verb. So for example, David handed in the essay on time. So in this sentence, I have the phrasal verb hand in, and I have the object, the essay. I can also put it in the middle. David handed the essay in on time. So with the essay, it doesn't matter. Handed in the essay, handed the essay in. No difference. But if I use the pronoun it for the essay, it must come between. David handed it in on time. This is an obligation now. So if you use the object pronoun, it must go in between the phrasal verb. I'll pick John up from the airport. Here, object is John, phrasal verb pick up. Now it's in between, and it doesn't matter. I'll pick up John, I'll pick John up. No difference. But I'll pick him up from the airport. It must be between. We cannot say pick up him. Can't say that. Or how about this? The company threw away the files. The company threw them away. So we can see that the change between a direct object pronoun and the full specific object is very important, because when it is a direct object pronoun, it must come between the phrasal verb. If it's just a normal object, it doesn't matter. And this is only true for the separable ones. Be very careful. I want to be very clear about this. The separable phrasal verbs have these rules. The inseparable ones do not. So, for example, if we return to these examples, look after, run into, put up with, these do not separate. So even with a pronoun, it does not separate. To look after him, to run into her, to put up with them, it stays the same. These two rules only apply when the phrasal verb can separate. That's the only time they apply. So then, you might have the question, how do I know? How do I know if a phrasal verb can separate, or how do I know if it cannot separate? And this is unfortunately where I cannot say a rule. I'm sorry, there is no good rule in English to learn this. It's all just memorization. Really, the best thing is a dictionary. A dictionary is really the only place where you can see and check if a phrasal verb can separate or if it cannot separate. So, always I recommend you have a good English dictionary on your phone so that you can check these things if you ever have any doubts. So, as I said, we'll now talk about some common phrasal verbs. These are some ones I think are important for you to know, and I've got them organized by category. So these are intransitive phrasal verbs, no objects. So to come in, that's a very common one. It means to enter. This one is often shouted at a door, knock, 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 come in. That's a common usage for this. However, we can change the preposition, come over. So come in is just to enter a door or to enter a place. Come over is now to visit. Now you have the idea of someone coming to visit your home for some time. Next, we have to get up. This is to leave a chair, to get up. It can also be a bed, anything that you sit on. You could get up from anything that you sit. Or even the ground. You can get up from the floor or the ground. Another one is to show off. This is to boast or to brag. If you are unclear about these words, to boast or to brag means to try to show your success, or to try to show your wealth, or to try to show your idea so that everyone sees. You're going, oh, look at me. Look at me. I'm so great. I'm amazing. I'm amazing. Look, I created a new thing. My thing is the best. Look at my thing. That's to brag. You can also say to show off or to wake up. This is just to open your eyes, and I'll talk about a difference between wake up and get up in a moment. So here are some examples. They tried to come in through the front door. It was locked, however, they couldn't. So here we have come in, meaning to enter the front door, but we see we do not have, they tried to come in the door. We can't say that. This is intransitive, so we use a prepositional phrase through the front door. Another one, they'll come over for dinner at 5 p.m. So now I'm just saying about the dinner plans. They'll come over, and I can just say just that. They'll come over because it is an intransitive verb. Or I can add information with a prepositional phrase for dinner at 5. Another one, I get up at 8:30 a.m., but I wake up at 8 a.m. So this is a difference between get up and wake up. So wake up is actually to open your eyes from sleep, whereas get up is to leave the chair, leave the bed. It's a difference in the process. Or my brother always shows off at parties and tries to play the guitar. So my brother, he practices the guitars. He goes to a party, and the first thing is, "Ooh, look at me! I can play the guitar." Maybe you know someone like that. But so this is the idea for show off to try to make people see you. All right. So these are 5 very common intransitive phrasal verbs. Let's look at some common transitive verbs, but are still inseparable. So these you cannot separate, and you cannot separate the other 5 I talked about. So we have to catch up with. This is a 3-part one, and this means to share news with somebody. To get away with, this is usually involving crime or something bad, and this is to escape. If you get away with something, uh, uh, nobody knows. Nobody sees that you did it. Nobody understands that you did it. So you got away with it. To go through, this is to use all of something. To run into, as we talked about before, to meet someone by chance, unexpected. Or to take after. I talked about that one before too. To take after, to look after, or sorry, to take after, this is to look the same as someone. So, for example, it was great to catch up with my sister. We haven't spoken together for weeks. So I'm saying it was very good to talk with her and to share news because I haven't spoken to her in a very long time. How about the thief got away with it because the police never found her? So this could be the crime, got away with the robbery, the burglary, whatever. But the police never found her, so she is safe. So she got away with it. She did the crime, no punishment. Get away with. Number 3, we have gone through all of our flour. We better buy some. So to go through, just to use all of. So we've gone through our flour. I don't have any more. Or my grandma ran into a friend in the park. She saw someone, they talked, they didn't expect to see each other. And then I take after my father. We love the same things. So here, take after is to look the same or to like the same thing. So, for example, you can use it really in both contexts. So I take after my father, we have the same eyes, the same nose. Or I take after my father, we both love music. Whatever you want. It can be either personality or physical appearance. All right. So then how about some transitive verbs that are separable? So we talked about intransitive, not separable, transitive, not separable. So now it's time for the separable ones. A very common one is to bring up. I talked about that one before. This is to mention an idea. To fill out, this is to complete a form, usually some kind of government or official document. To fill up, this is to fill to capacity. So out and up. So we can see that both of these change the meaning just by changing the preposition. So you do have to be very careful. To hand in, I talked about that one, to submit an assignment. Or to look up, this is to research something. And so we can see here that all of these can be separated or put together. I brought up the idea in the meeting, or I brought it up in the meeting. You can use either. Or I can say, I brought the idea up in the meeting. So, as I said, it doesn't matter if you separate it or not, but just remember if you use the pronoun, it must separate. Or the next one, please fill this form out. Please fill this out and return it to us. So here I'm using the pronoun this. Please fill this out and return it to us. So I've separated fill and out. I can also undo it. Please fill out this and return it to us. No real difference. I filled the bathtub for a bath. So here I have fill up, and this is the idea of, adding until you cannot add anymore. So I filled up the bathtub with water for a bath. Or she handed in the assignment 3 days early, so she submitted it to the teacher 3 days early. Or she could say she handed the assignment in, or she handed it in. No problem. Or finally, look it up. The internet knows everything. Yeah, this is a very common expression. Look it up. That means to research it, go find information about it. This is always separable, so you can say, look, you know, look the idea up, look up the idea, or look it up. So if you ever hear, look it up, we say it very quickly, look it up. And this is telling you, do some research, try to gain more knowledge. All right. Well, those were 15 very common phrasal verbs. Of course, there are so many phrasal verbs. I mean, there are hundreds of them. And so, this is something that you just need to study again and again and again. This is somewhere where flashcards are really helpful. Put up the flashcard, look up, the other side, research, and then you can quiz yourself. Look up, research, look up, research. That's one way to do it. There are many websites that you can use to kind of create free flashcards if you do not want to waste paper. Um, and as always, if you want additional practice with this, and you are a SEDA student, please go to the SEDA Google Classroom and you can find some additional practice for these phrasal verbs. Okay, so what did we talk about today? Well, we talked about phrasal verbs. We talked about intransitive phrasal verbs. They are no object and they cannot separate. We talked about transitive phrasal verbs. They have an object, so there's always a noun after the phrasal verb. They can be separable or inseparable. It depends on the phrasal verb. The only way to know all of this, really, the only way is to know about the dictionary. Unfortunately, you just have to look them up in the dictionary. Of course, if you really love grammar and you want to learn a lot of specific grammar stuff, do some internet research, look it up. You can find more about them. But the easiest way is a dictionary. And remember, if you do separate it with a pronoun, it must go in the middle. The pronoun always goes in the middle for these separable phrasal verbs. And then at the end, I gave a list of 15 common phrasal verbs and their definitions and examples for all of these categories. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming and watching this lesson today. I hope you learned something new about phrasal verbs. I appreciate you spending time with me and learning English with me day after day. So thank you so much for coming. Have a good afternoon, and I hope to see you again. Bye-bye.